We all make mistakes. After all, we're only human. But some mistakes are definitely more costly than others. In extreme cases, that can mean losing more money than a lot of us will earn in our lifetimes. Some of these mistakes will literally make you feel rich. Ready to witness the ultimate cases of clumsiness and bad luck? Let's get it on! One thing's certain, the harder you try to look, the easier it becomes to make a fool of yourself. So you better be absolutely sure you can do what you're attempting. This guy obviously didn't know that. He decided he was perfectly capable of doing donuts in his car in the middle of a street. Or perhaps he was trying to do a burnout and failing even more than we think. Either way, it goes very wrong very fast. It's a good idea to know where your brakes are if you're going to be kicking up smoke so you can't see. He knows that now, I'm sure. Often, mistakes can be avoided by simply being a little bit more careful. Many people learn that a little too late though, and that's definitely the case in this video. It seems like the kid driving the forklift got a little too confident with his abilities and accidentally drove straight into the back of the truck. Run. We're not sure about the cost of the damages, but 2 huge piercings like that can't be a quick fix. What he was trying to do exactly though? I guess we'll never know. Car crashes are always terrible, even if nobody gets hurt, just because of the costs involved. And that's just with regular cars. It gets much worse when the crash happens with a race car. And this particular crash, which happened at the Macau Grand Prix, took that to a whole new level by simply adding more and more cars into the mix.
And there's millions and millions of dollars of damage here.
In fact, the massive pileup took out almost all competitors except for the 4 cars that were already ahead. I'll leave it up to you to count how many cars were involved because I lose count after 5. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but that doesn't mean the situation didn't add insult to injury. The pileup took place in the first lap of a qualifying round. That amount of destruction for a qualifier just doesn't seem worth it. Sometimes we try things with the best intentions, but it blows up in our face. We all know that feeling. So you can really feel for this salesperson who made the mistake of saying yes to a buyer who asked to view the ring they were looking at in natural light. The clever thief really takes his time in creating a false sense of security in that poor saleswoman standing outside the shop with them. She thinks she's absolutely fine until she looks away for a second to open the door, and the brazen thief just walks off as though nothing's happening. The severity of this mistake really depends on what the ring was worth though, and unfortunately, this poor salesperson did not get off lightly. It happens to be worth an eye-watering $16,000. No wonder she was willing to give the guy anything he asked for to make the sale. It must be great being the CEO of a big company that's worth billions of dollars. Imagine all your money. But as we've already seen, expensive assets mean expensive accidents. So, how would you feel if you owned a cruise ship worth hundreds of millions of dollars and another ship accidentally crashed into it?
Boy.
The footage of this costly mistake looks deceivingly gentle and slow until the ships actually make contact and you realize the power and weight of these huge vessels against each other. Luckily, nobody was seriously injured, but that's not the end of the story for the owner of these cruise ships, because as it turned out, the ship that collided into the other was also owned by the same company. That's really gotta hurt. F1 racing is exciting because we all know how difficult it must be. At those speeds, the slightest mistake can be deadly. Luckily, no humans suffered during the making of this crash, but someone's wallet certainly did. Keep in mind that these cars are usually worth between $10 to $20 million. All it took was one ever so slightly misjudged overtake on the fastest section of the track, and this Red Bull car was literally flying through the air, smashing back into the ground upside down and nose first, before bouncing off a tire barrier, with its own wheels rolling away as if they're trying to escape certain death. You know a crash is bad when the driver throws the steering wheel out the car afterwards. Filming is notoriously expensive. The more popular a movie or show is, the more expensive the equipment becomes. Take Top Gear for example. It's a hugely famous show with spin-offs all over the world, and they don't only have things like expensive cameras on set, but most importantly, expensive cars and vehicles too. You definitely wouldn't want something to go wrong on that set, like when the Korean version of the show decided to race a car against a helicopter. It looked like it was going really smoothly, and they even managed to finish the race before things went very wrong. Nobody was hurt, but the cost of that helicopter and the filming equipment that was on it going up in smoke definitely left someone with a few sleepless nights and a significantly lighter wallet. Any machine with wheels seems expensive, from the fanciest cars to the cheapest bikes. In fact, we'll save for years to afford them. So try not to think about how much professional off-road quad bikes cost when you watch this video. This mishap, which really does look like a scene from a disaster movie, is actually the result of the competition planners forgetting to check the racetrack.
You had one job. Just the one.
When you combine the cost of pulling those expensive quad bikes out of the mud, getting them cleaned and repairing or maybe even replacing any that were seriously damaged, you just know that whoever was in charge cried himself to sleep that night. The richer you are, the more money you have to spend, and that's great. But the other side of that is the more money you spend, the more you have to lose if something goes wrong. Say, for example, you buy a 120-foot-long yacht worth around $7 million, like this one. That's great. Now you have a yacht with 13 bedrooms in it. What would happen, though, if it accidentally caught fire? Or if that unfortunate fire caused the yacht to capsize? Well, Mark Anthony, who owns this yacht, found out the hard way. It took 45 firefighters a total of 2 hours to get the huge fire under control, but there was some luck involved. The yacht isn't a total write-off, and nobody died. The bad news is it's going to cost $300,000 to fix up. If one thing's certain in life, it's that no matter what you do, nature wants to show you who's boss, it will. Hurricane Harvey was one of those moments and ended up being a truly devastating natural disaster. It took place in Texas, which just happens to have a lot of supercar collectors. You can see where this is going. Along with the extreme winds came 1,318 millimeters of rain. These poor exotic cars definitely suffered in the high floodwaters. Garages filled with these beautiful cars quickly became more like fish tanks. There's no way of telling the total cost of all the repairs or replacements needed on the combined number of supercars in the state, but it's safe to say that even for someone who only had one, it would have brought a lot of heartache. Flooding isn't the only way nature can get the better of cars, though. Maybe someone should have considered that before parking literally thousands of cars in close proximity at an empty lot. Obviously, nobody expected a fire to break out, but it did in a spectacular fashion. In the end, it took firefighters and helicopters 18 hours to extinguish the huge flames, and by then, 3,516 cars were damaged or burnt to a cinder. They did manage to save 3,850 other cars parked there, which is pretty impressive, but I'm not sure it feels like much of a consolation with the astounding number of cars that they now need to replace. Dominos is such a great game because of how satisfying it is. If you have the skill to put all the pieces in just the right place, the destruction happens effortlessly. This forklift driver learnt that the hard way, but probably experienced an emotion very different to satisfaction when he toppled these dominoes he didn't know were stacked around his workplace. He probably should have had some patience, but instead, he decided to squeeze his forklift through a gap that was a little too small. He just taps one warehouse shelving unit, but then it goes down like a ton of bricks, methodically taking other gigantic shelves down with it. The cleanup needed is bad enough, but there's no word on what was stacked on those shelves. Let's just hope for his sake that they're boxes of marshmallows instead of something like crystal champagne flutes. It can really pay to keep your eyes open sometimes. And remember not to take chances. Don't tempt fate. This bridge encourages both those mistakes, and it's becoming seriously costly. It was built 100 years ago, so it's significantly lower than others, and seems to attract trucks like ants to a picnic despite the signs indicating its low height. They've been crashing into it for years, scraping the tops off the vehicles or destroying their cargo hundreds of times over and causing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damages. It really does seem clearly marked, however, so this probably is just a case of careless drivers. I'm sure they learned their lesson pretty soon after, though. With the theme of expensive mistakes in mind, here are a few words of advice to keep your wallet happy. Check that there's a road behind you before backing up a huge bus. Then check again to make sure there are no Corvettes parked on that road. Always check your wall mount before attaching your top-of-the-range TV to it. Be sure to check how expensive something is before pouring concrete onto it. Inform your guests who own the Land Rover about your fancy hidden pop-up garage. And finally, don't drive your car into a swimming pool, no matter how high-tech it is, and especially if it can be called a luxury car.